For almost 130 years, this handsome brick building at what we now call Gilbert's Corner on Route 50 in Loudoun County was the peaceful Mount Zion Old Baptist Church. But during the 4 violent years of the Civil War, it was used by both Union and Confederate forces as a barrack, a prison, a hospital, a battlefield, and a cemetery. Owned and operated by the NVRPA, Mount Zion was also one of the rendezvous sites for Mosby and his Rangers.
This was a well-known landmark along the Little River Turnpike. In 1863, when the Union forces were heading what will ultimately be to Gettysburg, they were coming right by this on the turnpike and would use it as a hospital. On the way to Gettysburg, though, cavalry battles ensued just west of us as General Pleasanton's Union cavalry tried to go west on what is today Route 50 towards the Blue Ridge and see exactly where General Lee's army was. They suspected that it was entirely on the other side of the Blue Ridge, but they never got across the Blue Ridge at Ashby's Gap to find out, because General Stuart's Confederates fought them tooth and nail for 5 days so that they never got across. But that led to huge numbers of casualties, and this building then became a full-blown hospital with a surgeon working, with severed arms and legs, amputated arms and legs being thrown out the window, and with the benches, some of our pews being ripped up from the floor and broken up and built into crude coffins, and the graveyard that surrounds the church being turned into a graveyard.
In early July 1864, Mosby's men cut the telegraph wires between Harper's Ferry and Washington so that Jubal Early's attack on Washington might remain a surprise. When Washington learned that Mosby was on the loose again, it ordered Major William Forbes, a 24-year-old Harvard man, and 2 troops of cavalry into Loudoun County to hunt down Mosby.
On the 6th of July, it's a Wednesday, hot. Mosby shows up in Leesburg in the morning and finds out that there has been a federal column, 150 men from the 2nd Massachusetts and the 13th New York out looking for him. So he gets right behind them on their trail. And, well, he follows them most of the day. Eventually, he gets intelligence that they're going to Aldie, and then they're going to stop for supper near Mount Zion Church. So what Mosby does is he takes back roads and gets east of the federal column along today's Route 50. These Federals were actually a little bit east of the church in a field near the Skinner House. They had dismounted, they were making coffee. The Federals were letting the horses graze and getting them watered. It was about 6:30 at night. Of course, they had pickets just down the turnpike to make sure that they were covered. And at just after 6:30, all these Federals start to hear gunfire. It's Mosby's pickets, and Mosby's pickets are galloping at full speed towards the Federal pickets, who immediately are flushed out and race back towards their camp around the Skinner House that's just east of Mount Zion Church. Mosby then lines up his men and they charge, and by the time they start to charge, the Federals have already sounded their bugles. They have lined up in 2 lines in the field that they're in, and they are ready for whatever Mosby has to give them. The problem is that these particular Federals have not actually fought all that much. They've been on a large number of missions, but they haven't actually been in combat as much as you might like. The one thing that we find fascinating is that Mosby has a cannon with him. And as his men start to charge, that cannon fires, and that shell arcs right over them, and it lands and explodes in midair immediately behind the 2 Federal ranks.
Union Major Forbes bravely rallied his troops again and again, but Mosby's Rangers continued their assault, firing pistols with both hands.
The Federals really found just how awkward it is to fight with people holding pistols. Mosby's men were doing very, very well, and finally Forbes's men broke and ran, and once again he rallied them in the wood just east of the church. And at that particular point, Forbes and Mosby do a rare thing. They go at it with each other. And at this particular point, Mosby might have had reason to question his whole belief in pistols, because Forbes takes his saber and makes a thrust at Mosby, and he would have killed him. It's just that one of Mosby's young officers, Tom Richards, intervenes and gets right between them, and the saber goes through Tom Richards' shoulder. Mosby fires his pistol, and at the second he goes to fire the pistol, Major Forbes's horse rears and takes the shot. The horse collapses on top of Major Forbes, and he cannot get out. And with Major Forbes down, it becomes a real race. Most of the Union cavalry now heads down the Carolina Road, frantically trying to get out of there. And when all is said and done, 12 Union troopers have been killed. Some 36, 37 have been wounded, and the estimates of the captured vary from 44 to 57. Those fellows have been absolutely crushed. Mosby lost 1 Ranger, Henry Smallwood, killed, and 6 wounded, none of them mortally.
The action at Mount Zion was a decisive Confederate victory. Even though the momentum had already shifted to the Union, Northern Virginia would remain a contested battleground as long as Mosby's Rangers were still a force. Mount Zion also demonstrated to Major Forbes and his Union cavalry that war was not so much about dignity as it was about survival.
After the fight at Mount Zion Church, Major Forbes had a chance to comment on it. Of course, the poor guy had been crushed under his horse, but he complained bitterly of our irregular treatment of his crack battalion, remembers Mosby Ranger Johnny Alexander. The major insisted with tears in his eyes that what we had done was unprofessional. Well, maybe it was. He had formed as well-appointed and thoroughly disciplined veterans in magnificent array in an open field and awaited our attack with all the confidence of the proficient commander of an invincible machine. But for us, if a charge was to be made, we didn't go into it in serried ranks and with orderly approach as if to impress the enemy with our awful dignity. Each man realized that the shorter the time from the start to the finish, the less the danger was, and would clap spurs to his horse, often throw the bridle rein on its neck, and with pistol in each hand bend every energy to getting there, and making himself as numerous and influential as possible on the way. The very insanity of the thing ensured its success.